So my talk is about challenging the status quo, specifically in ICU nutrition, and it's a bit of a opinion-based talk rather than evidence-based talk. So I hope that's okay with you, and I'm happy to take any questions. Just a couple of disclosures. I have some investigator-initiated research funding with Baxter Healthcare. And another disclosure is that I am searching for evidence, and nutrition is a black hole, really, when it comes to evidence, and that's a little bit of an issue. And I think in a talk such as this, it helps that you understand where I'm coming from. So I do have a couple of biases. I don't think we know when nutrition may be beneficial. I think we've only researched the early period of critical illness with nutrition, and until we make judgments about the value of nutrition, we need to research it properly and actually investigate the whole patient journey. And we know at least standard care nutrition is required, which also takes effort. So this is where I'm coming from when I'm talking to you about changing the status quo. So what is the status quo? What's the existing state of affairs, and why would we want to change that? Well, I think if we're just stuck, then we're never moving forward and never improving things. And from a nutrition point of view, dietitians, in my opinion, are the perfect people to move this forward. I'm not going to bore you with too many definitions, but really, if you look at our governing body in Australia, they believe a dietitian is someone that is highly qualified to interface nutrition with medical care and how that interacts. When I asked Google what a dietitian is, this is what I got. So we wear white lab coats and we smile at fruit. And people who know me probably know that I don't do that very often, but I would like to challenge this status quo. I find this slightly offending. And I also thought, well, for balance, let's just have a look and see what Google thinks doctors are. And it's not much better. You have a bit more diversity, but it's not much better. You also wear white coats and you have stethoscopes, all of you. I assume you do. So these are status quos, and I'd like to challenge that. I don't think that is fair. So how can we do that? So I think the first thing I think is vital is depth of knowledge and clinical competency. And when we come out of uni, often we're so excited because we've finished uni and we think that's the end, but it's only the beginning. And I think that's very, very important, that if you want to be a clinical expert, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to continue to increase your knowledge, and I think that's a very key part of this. How do you do that? Well, we need to be critical of our practice, and for me, in my practice, the questions I ask myself are, am I missing something? And does it feel okay? And as you become more of an experienced clinician, you get a feeling of whether what you're doing sits well with you. And if it doesn't, then I need to reflect on that. Ask for feedback from people that you trust, people that are in your corner, and listen to those who give you feedback, and particularly identify areas of weakness. So this can be hard. It can be hard to acknowledge that maybe you're not as strong in an area that you should be, but I think if you identify that, then seek to improve in that area. If you want to improve your nutrition knowledge, these are a couple of things that you can do. So the European Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition have a lifelong learning program, and they have several nutrition-based modules. So these are free, online, and if you would just like to educate yourself a little bit more, this is a great place to start. Also look outside of ICU. So this is the basic course. It's something that our trainees in Australia do when they come into ICU. And all of our dietitians at the Alfred also do this course. Why would they do that? We don't need to ventilate a patient, we don't need to intubate, but we do need to understand the medical care that informs what our doctors do, because that's how I provide expert nutrition advice. So I think this is very important. So we have all done the basic course, and that helps me understand what's going on medically and how I can best provide nutrition advice for that patient. There's some great resources around, so I am using a couple of these in my talk, but Critical Care Reviews is a fantastic resource which each week sends you an email with the latest research in the area. Life in the Fast Lane is an amazing resource with summaries of clinical conditions, and if you were not sure about a medical management for something, you could easily look this up. It just gives you a quick summary. And the Bottom Line is another website that provides summaries of trials in critical care, and I have been doing a little bit of work with them, and we're trying to summarise all of the major nutrition trials as well for the Bottom Line, so that we can actually have a place where people can go and have hopefully a balanced assessment of critical care nutrition trials. Further things that you can do is go to conferences like this one and not just nutrition ones. I think it's really important to get out of your area. Don't just go to nutrition conferences. Go to medical conferences, go to other conferences. Actually hear what's going on in the wider audience. Get out there. Show your nursing and medical teams that you are interested in what they are doing, not just nutrition. We need to learn to critically appraise the literature and have an academic discussion. So that means understanding the key pieces of work in the area, being able to apply it in your hospital and have a chat with your team about that and have an opinion. You have to be expert in your setting. So I'm from the Alfred ICU. It's a large ICU. It's very complex. It's very acute. And we have a very high case mix of ventilated patients, probably the highest in Australia. That means that my setting is very different to lots of people's, and my knowledge, therefore, is different to a lot of people. So I need to be expert in this ICU, and I may not be the expert in a different ICU because the case mix is different. So understand who the patients are that are in your ICU. We need to lead nutrition in the ICU setting. So I would like that everyone's leading nutrition, but of course someone has to be the leader, and I think obviously the dietitian can be that person. And that comes back to knowing your value, knowing what your role is, and knowing what your purpose is. And if you don't know, other people are not going to know. So you have to have a think about that. And your value is not making sure that the enteral feeds are on. The doctors and the nurses can do that themselves. They're highly intelligent and very well trained. That's not our value. Our value is being the expert in nutrition and providing expert advice that sits with the medical condition that that patient has. And I come back to the picture that I put up at the start and say we have to challenge this status quo. This is not our value. Our value is not smiling at fruit and vegetables. It's actually much more than that. We need to facilitate nutrition and fix what isn't working. So some examples in our hospital is that we kept running out of feed pumps and it was quite annoying. So we had to fix that problem so that we could start nutrition whenever. We also put standard enteral nutrition into the unit so that anyone can start nutrition at any time without us. So those sorts of things, look around and have a look at what's not working. Be the facilitator and fix those things. We need to make sure we're evidence-based, of course, and also manage the HR considerations. So for us, we have to make sure we have an appropriate case mix of staff that can manage the high acuity and specialist areas in our ICU. And that's actually quite a challenge because our case mix is quite different to other people. We have lots of specialist services, so ECMO, burns, organ transplant. All of those things require lots of training and skill for our dietitians and for all of our staff in the ICU. And of course you have to build relationships. It's all really about relationships at the end of the day and people skills. Speaking up is a very important part of this. So first, do not be silent. And this is something that I really try in my practice. I don't think I've ever been accused of not speaking up, but it's something that I really try and practice to do. And really what it comes down to is we have to advocate for nutrition. And if I'm getting a sense that something is not going right or I need to say something, then I absolutely have to. That's why I'm here. And that comes back to knowing your role and your purpose. Part of my role is to advocate for nutrition and make sure that the team are informed. Speaking up, and you can go to Life in the Fast Lane, there's a lot more information there, but it refers to a non-leader per se actually raising a concern before something happens. So you don't want to get into a situation where you are raising something and something terrible has already happened. You want to advocate before and never leave a situation thinking I should have said something. We want to monitor our effectiveness. So we need to define what quality care is. So how do you do that? We've talked a little bit about that. Abby nicely outlined that. We need to benchmark nationally and internationally, develop key performance indicators for your service. So what's relevant to your hospital? Determine how you can fit with the wider KPIs of the hospital and how your nutrition service fits with that. Determine what is quality nutrition in your service, and notice that I'm saying in your hospital. So what is appropriate in my hospital may not work for you, and that's fine, but you need to apply it to your setting. Some examples of what we do. So we do internal benchmarking. We look at how many patients are fed within 24 hours. And we also complete our own time to feeding audit for the whole unit, so not just a select group. And we use external data. So there's two options here. Unfortunately, the International Nutrition Survey is not run anymore, but that was a huge resource for us. But ESPN runs a Nutrition Day, which is another resource, or you can do it yourself, which is since the International Nutrition Survey is not run now, we are actually starting to do our own in-service audit. Why do we need to benchmark nutrition, not just ICU nutrition, but nutrition? Because we will not change anything without it, and we have to have data to do that. It provides information on human resources, advocacy, outcomes, case mix, and so all of this, I don't know how you can be in a service if you don't have this data. You have to be able to improve your practice. Yeah, hopefully that's displaying well. It's just not coming up on the screen well here. So this is just an example of what we use our International Nutrition Survey data for. So we contributed every year. We have 5 years of data. Every time we contribute to this survey, which was a survey of 12 days of feeding around 20 patients every sort of 1 to 2 years. So a small sample, but it gave us a great snapshot of what was happening. We would go back to our consultants and we would present the report to them every time and talk about what went well, what wasn't going well, and how we needed to improve. We always aim to have our patients started feeding within 48 hours, so we want to be on the right hand of the screen for you guys, and on the left we don't want to be there, but we consistently did still have patients on that side. So for us that would be, okay, what's going on for these patients? Can we go back to the data and have a look at why we don't have nutrition started in 48 hours? You can see that we made some changes based on some of the early data, and in the last survey that we had most of our patients started at an average of 14 hours after starting in the ICU. The other thing that's been a consistent problem for us is fasting, and this happens year on year, and you can see that overall, we have less interruptions than other hospitals. So sister sites is Australia and New Zealand, and all sites is obviously international. We have less interruptions, but the duration of interruption is longer, and that was consistent for us, so 9 hours. So year on year this happened, and most of it was due to fasting, extubation and operations, and that is probably due to our case mix, I would say. But what that led to is actually developing a fasting guideline, so we use that data to improve our practice. The other thing we often do is use obviously the available literature to improve our guidelines. So you might be aware of the REGAIN study. It was a study published a few years ago now that looked at 500 mils versus 250 mils gastric residual volumes. They found no difference in clinical outcomes, and we thought, okay, this is probably something that we can do. So we reviewed our guideline, and this guideline is due for review again, but we reviewed this back in 2015. And we increased our gastric residual volume to 500 mils, and we've been successfully doing that since then with very minimal safety concerns or issues. What we need to do though is put that back into the quality cycle, so then when we audited against that, we had a look at how we were performing, and we presented a poster on this just to feed back onto how we were going. What did that mean for the patients? So case A is our new guideline of 500 mils. This patient had aspirates up to 400 mils and received a complete provision of nutrition. In the second case, it was when we had a cutoff of 250 mils, and they only received 50% of their nutrition adequacy because we were stopping feeds all the time. So it does have an impact on patients, and these things need to be carefully considered. We also use technology. So this is indirect calorimetry. I'm doing a talk tomorrow on energy, so you can hear a little bit more about that if you want. But just really to say we use as much technology as we can to try and be as scientific as we can with nutrition. This is an example of our electronic system. So we've just changed to an electronic database, and we made sure, as soon as we heard that this database was coming, that we lobbied to get a nutrition page. And so we are able to monitor daily provision of nutrition, cumulative nutrition provision for energy and protein over the whole hospital stay. This is a powerful tool for us, and we are able to then put these graphs up on the ward round and show the consultants and the nurses when we're not doing well and ask them to help us to come up with a strategy to fix this. It's really important to know our hospital did not come to us and say, would you like us to develop you this nice system, it'll cost a lot of money, and we're happy to do it for you. We had to ask, we had to make our position known, we had to explain what we do, we had to describe why we needed it. It was not an easy process. I don't know that we made a lot of friends in the process either, because it was difficult and it did cost a lot of money. But we got there in the end, and it's not perfect, it's not exactly what we wanted, but at least we have something. Because if we had done nothing, we would not be able to do our job. And so you have to be in the conversation. So the moment that you hear something like this is changing, make sure you know how it's going to impact your work, and don't be passive. Don't sit back and think, oh well, we'll just get what we're given, because it may not help you do your job. We need to contribute to improving the science of nutrition, so I'm just briefly going to touch on this. It's ideal if we can lead research. I think we are perfectly placed to collaborate. Just as Joanna was saying with the pharmacist role, we can collaborate with our medical and nursing colleagues to lead nutrition research, or at least be in the conversation. If you don't want to lead research or you don't have the skills, just get involved. Just find someone who will help you. This is just a small example of a couple of projects that I've been involved in, which are specific Alfred projects. They are practice things that we thought were interesting, that we thought other people might find interesting, and that is the beauty of working in a big hospital with a complex population. There's lots of small things about our service that we can share that help other people, but we regularly do that. And these are also projects, apart from the review, they're 3 projects that were registrar projects for some of our trainees. And so I had a couple of ideas about nutrition things that I'd like to look at. They needed a project, and it works beautifully because they get their project, we get to describe what's going on, and it works really well. And it's also a way to engage other people around nutrition. I'm very privileged now to lead a nutrition research program through Monash, through the ANZIC RC, and so that is where I focus most of my time, and it's a privilege to be able to really contribute on a wider level to the evidence base, and hopefully in the coming years we'll get some of that evidence that we so desperately need. And lastly, I think we need to seek to improve the profession and the nutrition care of our patients. And I just want to talk a little bit about this lady. So this is Mabel Flanley, and she's the first dietitian in Australia, and she was actually at the Alfred at the hospital that I was from. And she came from the UK, and she had a medical colleague who was very supportive of her, and he lobbied to the Alfred and said, you have to have a dietitian. We need 1 dietitian per 100 beds, and they are essential to have information about nutrition and the interface of how that works with medicine, to help with catering. And thankfully I don't love that part of our job, so we don't have to do a lot of that anymore, but that's what she did. She helped with the catering, and she had to educate the nurses. And he said to her, you've accepted a very serious responsibility introducing dietetics into a new country. You must pioneer this work. If you succeed, I know you will all the movement will rapidly spread throughout the Commonwealth. If you fail, which I know you will not, the program of dietetics in Australia will be set back many years. So no pressure on her. But she didn't fail. She succeeded, and this is her when she was going home. And she certainly didn't succeed by maintaining the status quo. She came into a new job, there was lots of resistance from the hospital, and she did not sit back and just say, well, it's a little bit hard. She actually pushed boundaries and challenged, and I think that's what we need to do. And it ultimately comes back to, what do you want your legacy to be from a professional point of view? Do you want people to say that you maintained the status quo, that you never made hard decisions, that you never pushed the boundaries? And that you weren't innovative? Or do you want people to say that, I can't read this, they were forward thinking, they weren't afraid to try new things, and they advanced their practice and their profession? And I know what I would prefer, and so I think for all of us as allied health clinicians, nurses, external people to medicine sometimes, we need to be able to think what we're actually providing to our profession and move it forward in that way. On that note, I'm wearing a koala. You're probably wondering why, and that's because I would like you all to come to Melbourne for the World Congress of Intensive Care. So it's fantastic to be here in Singapore, but Melbourne is an amazing city as well. It's going to be a great World Congress. So if there's any chance you can get yourself to Melbourne, please come and join us in October. On that note, thank you, and you can find me here if you need to.